Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the IOA podcast. I am Dr. Malaika, and I am your host. And remember, this is a space where we heal loudly and we live softly. So, for those of you who may be brand new, welcome. And we want you to pull up a chair. We want you to get comfortable. We want you to become part of the family. And if you have been with me since the very beginning of this show or season one, you know how this goes. So thank you again for keeping me company in this space that we have created. I don't take it lightly, and I say this every week, but I really do not take it lightly that you keep coming back to be a part of what we are doing. So before we get into today's episode, we're going to do a little bit of housekeeping. I want to make sure that we are doing what we need to do. We need to make sure we get the word out to those who are not aware of what we have going on here in this space. And the best way to do that is to like and subscribe to the show. We want to keep this community growing and we want to keep building it with intention. So if the show has met you in a moment when you needed it, 3 quick asks. We are just asking that you first hit the subscribe and follow wherever you may be listening. So if you're on Apple Podcasts, if you're on Spotify, if you're on iHeartRadio, or if you're watching on YouTube, we want you to hit that follow or subscribe button. Next, following is the single most important or most powerful thing that you can do. We know that that's important because it allows other people to know about what we are doing so that they can be aware of the work we are doing in this space. That's how it reaches the people that need it. The next thing, if you are on Apple Podcasts, please, I'm asking for you to just leave a 5-star review. We're asking you to leave one honest sentence about what the show has meant to you. The reviews are going to help new listeners decide whether or not to trust us with their time and decide whether or not it's worth the while to spend every Tuesday here with the IOA podcast. The next thing I'm going to ask is that you share an episode. It does not have to be this week's episode, but an episode with someone who has been carrying something quietly that you think needs to hear the message about what we were talking about in that particular show. So this is basically community care in action. It is important in what we do, and we want to make sure we get that out there. So remember, all of our platforms are always going to be linked in the show notes on the audio versions of the show. We will also be able to put links up so that you know where to find us on YouTube. The Substack companion for this episode is now live. And if you're a paid subscriber, you have access to extended practices every week. So it pays to be a paid subscriber. So we're just asking for you to pay either $8 a month, or if you want to pay for the year all at once, that's $80. But that gives you tools that go beyond what we talk about in the short time that we are here on the show. And so we'll get into more about the Substack practices as we get to the close of the episode. So I want to get into what we are talking about today. If you see the topic of today's episode, I kind of led in last week about what we were going to be talking about, but we are going to be talking about trauma having a context. And any of you who know me know that traumatology is one of my areas of expertise. It is something that I'm passionate about, particularly because of me being a Black woman, our community, what we've experienced and what we've gone through. It was one of the things that I wanted to know more about. And so I want us to get into talking about trauma having a context and how we can name harm without pathologizing. And so I think that that's really important. It's kind of one that I feel like this season has been building up until this point. And so it's really important that we walk through this carefully. So we're going to talk about it, but we're going to talk about it in a way that you may not have heard it talked about before. So we're going to take our first break of the episode. When we come back, I'm going to frame this for us because I want to make sure that this is framed in a way that we understand what is going on and we make sure that we are looking at this in the proper context. So we're going to take this break and we will be back in just a second. Welcome back, everyone, to the IOA podcast. And we are now going to get into the framing of this particular episode. And we want to talk about being able to name harm without pathologizing ourselves. And this is really important. I want to start by naming the moment that we are in. We have been talking about in the last couple of episodes about some things that are really important. We talked about our identity being attacked and what that does to us. We talked about being able to speak things in a safe way and understanding what spaces are safe to speak and understanding that speaking things needs to start with us before we move into anything else. So this kind of leads into what we're talking about. I try to give you a foundation for you to be able to start with so that when we got here, we will be in a place that we are prepared better to go into the conversation. So, trauma as a word, it's one of my pet peeves. I feel like it's gone everywhere, especially in the last 5 to 10 years. You hear trauma response, you hear trauma bond, you hear trauma dump, you hear trauma informed. Trauma's in captions, it's on TikTok, it's in dating profiles, you see it in workplace memos. And one of the problems that I have with the mainstreaming of trauma language, while it has been a gift, it has also been a curse. It has given a lot of people a way to name what was previously unnamed. It has helped reduce shame. It has helped people find the door to therapy who would never have walked through that door. So we don't want to discount that without having this language or hearing this language. On the other hand, the overuse of trauma, language specifically, has flattened it in the way that it was not intended to be flattened. We have started to call every uncomfortable experience trauma. And that is the problem that I have with this. Every irritating coworker, every bad date, every disappointment in life when things don't go our way. The result is that the word has lost some of its precision. And I might go to say it's lost a lot of its precision. When a word loses its precision, the body cannot use it to do the actual healing work. That was what we were talking about, the language, the speaking in episode 32. There was a reason why we were talking about that. Part of the healing journey is the words and the language that's being used because our body will respond to that. The body needs accurate language, not trendy language. And what we are going to do with this episode is we are going to start the journey on restoring precision to this word trauma. So this episode is for the person who has been wondering if they are using the word right, for the person who has been told by an internet stranger or a well-meaning friend that something they experienced was traumatic and has not been sure whether or not to accept that framing. This is for the person who has, on the other hand, been gaslit out of recognizing what was actually traumatic in their own story. This is for the person that's carrying real harm and not sure how to talk about it without making their whole identity into the harm. Because here is the tension that we are going to address today. We need precise language for harm so that we can name what happened, also so that we can find the right help for what has happened to us, and also so that we can grieve appropriately. And we need that naming to be the doorway to our wholeness. We don't need it to be a permanent address. And unfortunately, with the way things are running now, we have now made this a permanent address. The goal of trauma work is not to become your trauma. The goal is to integrate it, to contextualize it, and to let it to be one of the chapters in a much longer story. So if you find yourself stuck here, then what you have done is you have made the trauma a destination. I want to be clear about something. Precision is not the same as gatekeeping. I am not standing here telling you that you can only tell certain experiences in certain spaces or only certain experiences qualify as suffering, because there is a difference from having pain and suffering and trauma, and we need to understand what those differences are. I'm not policing the word because I don't have the right to do that. I am not telling you to use different words when the word is appropriate. What I am asking gently is for us to bring more skill to the words that we use about ourselves, because the words that we use shape what we believe is possible. If I tell myself everything that ever hurt me was trauma, I leave myself almost no room for any other kind of story. I make myself a permanent patient. If I can distinguish what was stress from what was grief, from what was rupture, from what was trauma, I have a fuller map of my own life. And the fuller map means there's more possibilities. There's more forms of healing that can be approached. There's more forms of meaning that can be given. And today we're going to walk through these three things, and we're going to draw from chapters in Rooted in Resilience, which we know is the book that we use for all the work we do here on the show. We're going to use the chapter on the body, the chapter on the mirror, and the chapter on the disruption. And remember, we keep coming back to these chapters repeatedly this season. One, what trauma actually is somatically and clinically. We're going to get into the body. That's where that's going to come from. Two, how to name harm honestly without collapsing your whole identity into it. All right, that's the mirror. And then three, the practice of contextualizing your own story. What actually happened to you? What was around you while it happened? Both matter and both belong. We're going to get into that. So let's begin the work. We'll be back in just a second. Welcome back, everyone, to the episode. And we're going to get a little bit deeper into the work that we are doing here on the show. And as promised, I always like to contextualize what we are talking about. And so we are going to talk about what trauma actually is. So let me give a definition, because remember, in the introduction and lead up to here, I talked about the fact that precision matters. Trauma in the clinical and the somatic sense, right, is not an event. Trauma is a response. The same event can be traumatic for one person and not for another, because trauma is not about what is happening outside of you. It's about what's happening inside of your nervous system. Okay. The external world is not the dictator here. So two siblings can experience the exact same childhood experience, and they can emerge with two very different trauma profiles because their nervous systems metabolize the experience differently. That is not a moral judgment on either of them. That is not saying that one is better than the other. What is happening here is this is just how their bodies happen to work. Trauma occurs when an experience overwhelms your body's capacity to process it in that moment. And I want us to sit with that, because I feel like that foundation is very, very important. The system gets flooded. The normal pathways for integrating an experience now get bypassed, and the unprocessed materials get stored. The places they get stored are in your muscles, in your nervous system, in your implicit memory, where it continues to influence behavior, sensation, and emotions long after this experience has passed. There are some important distinctions that I want us to make. Stress is not trauma. I'll say it again. Stress is not trauma. Stress is the body's normal response to a demand. We've talked about stress before on the show. We've talked about what stressors are. We've gotten into that in detail. Stress resolves when the demand resolves. Discomfort is not trauma. Discomfort is the experience of something difficult And discomfort is often a necessary ingredient in growth. Grief is not necessarily trauma. Grief is the body's response to loss, and grief can be metabolized through normal pathways with enough time and support. None of these things are bad. None of these things are diminished by not being called trauma. They are legitimate on their own face and don't need to be puffed up for them to be something that matter. They have their own things. They have their own dignity. Trauma is a very specific response. It occurs when the system is overwhelmed beyond its capacity to integrate. The body knows the difference. The body, if you listen to her, and I'm saying her because mine is a her, will tell you which of your experiences were stress, which were discomfort, and which were grief. And it will also let you know when you've experienced trauma. They feel different in your body. They live differently in your body. They require different treatments and approaches to care. Why does this matter? Because if you call every difficult experience trauma, you're now training your nervous system to over respond to unnecessary and or average and ordinary stressors. You teach the body that any discomfort is dangerous. And again, the name of my book is Rooted in Resilience. And resilience is not built when we feel that any discomfort is something that we cannot go through. What also happens after that is an actual traumatic experience will happen, and you now don't have the precise language or the precise capacity to address it because everything has been at the same volume. So precision actually in this moment, in this process, is medicine. When you can name an experience as stress instead of trauma, you give your body permission to use stress response tools, which are different than trauma response tools. When you can name an experience as grief instead of trauma, you give your body permission to grieve. Grief and trauma can travel together, but they are not the same. The work of naming is the work of giving your body the right address so that the right help can find it. Let me give you a way to feel the difference. Stress in the body is a tight engine. The system is running hot, it's working hard, but the wiring is still intact. When the demands stop, the engine will cool down. Grief in the body is a slow, heavy water. It moves through you in waves. It pulls at you. And over time, with the right witnesses, it becomes part of how you carry the love that remains. Trauma in the body is different. Trauma is a stored bracing. It is a piece of the experience that did not get to finish moving. It sits in your muscles. It sits in your gut. It sits in your breath. It can be triggered years later by a sound, a smell, a tone, a voice that the body recognizes as similar to the original threat. The body is now responding before the mind has caught up. That is trauma. That is a very specific signature and it requires very specific treatment. And I want to add one more piece here. Some of you listening have experienced things that are unmistakably traumatic. So we're not minimizing this. You may have gone through sexual violence, physical abuse, loss of a child, witnessing a death, gone through combat, racialized violence, medical trauma, severe neglect. These things are not in question. If you are carrying something like this, please hear me. Your trauma is real. The precision I am asking for in this episode is for clarity, not for minimization. Your story is not a meme. Your healing requires the kind of slow witness professional support that this podcast cannot replace. So please get it. The precision I'm asking for is so that the people who have not had those experiences do not borrow the framework in a way that crowds out the people who have. And so the people who have had these experiences can have their language honored and held by the rest of us with the gravity and the weight that it deserves. There is also a generational piece of this that I want to name briefly. For many of our parents and grandparents, especially in Black communities, the word trauma did not exist in their vocabulary. Things just got handled. They got survived, they got carried in the body until the body said something. So, part of why this generation is talking about trauma so much is that we are finally allowed to use a word to describe what we've gone through. We are finishing language that was started in silence. This is sacred work. The precision I'm asking for from you today is not in opposition to that, it is in service of it. Because the more skill we bring to this conversation, the more we honor the people who lived through these things before any of us ever had a word to describe it. Let's take our next break. And I want to get into the chapter on the mirror and how we can name harm without us collapsing into the harm that have experienced. Let's take our break and we will be back in just a second. Let's move to the second chapter that we talked about in the opening for the foundation of this episode. We are going to get into talking about the mirror. The mirror chapter in Rooted in Resilience is about how we come to see ourselves accurately, which is important. How we're holding the parts of our story that are hard, and the accuracy matters in this moment and in this process. Here's the tension. You have to name what happened to you. So I often have students, especially when we get into the chapter on disorders and treatment in my intro psych classes, or even in classes that in some capacity deal with psychopathology and deal with disorders. They often ask about questions surrounding traumatic experiences and how do you deal with it. And one of the things I often say is that one of the effective practices has been prolonged exposure therapy, which is an approach to facing what happened, which means that you're going to have to name it. So if you can't name what you went through, you can't heal from it. And it's really important. Naming it, facing it is part of the process. Unnamed harm is going to do the most damage because it's operating in the background. It's shaping every choice that you make without your awareness. And the naming is the first type of medicine on the journey to healing. Naming must not just become the whole story. And I think that this is where it's important for us to kind of sit in and discuss. Some of us, when we finally get the language, we swing all the way into it. And now our identity becomes the trauma. Our biography becomes the harm. Every conversation we have becomes a return to that wound. We start to introduce ourselves through what was done to us instead of through who we are now. This is a stage. This is a normal stage. There is a period in the healing process, having been denied the language for so long that you have to use the language constantly just for you to better understand that this is real, that what you went through. That period is necessary and that period is sacred. Do not be ashamed of it, but it is not the destination. And that is what I want you to understand. The destination is integration. Integration is when you can hold the harm honestly without it consuming the rest of who you are. And you can say, yes, this happened to me. Yes, it has shaped me. And it is not the entirety of me. The harm becomes a chapter, like I said, in a longer story. It's not your whole book. The harm gets put in its actual size, which makes it real. And it's not infinite. It's not something that is meant to be carried never ending. So how do you get to the integration? I'm pretty sure that's the question you have. You get there through context. Context is the medicine that keeps the wound from becoming the whole identity. Let me explain what I mean by that. If you tell yourself the story of what happened to you alone in isolation with no surrounding context, just the wound and you, the wound has nothing to compare itself to. So now it's going to expand, it's going to fill the whole frame. But if you tell yourself the story in context, what was happening in your family, in your community, your historical moment, your culture, your body, the wound now has a place. It has a shape, it has boundaries, and in it, it now has a relationship to other things instead of it just being the only thing. So when we were talking about just the attack on our identity, our belonging, and who we are in our existence, we were saying that to give context, not for us to sit in the wound and allow that to become our total identity as a diaspora. Context does not minimize. Context does not let the perpetrator off the hook. Context doesn't excuse what happened to you. What it simply does is prevents the harm from becoming infinite. And because nothing in your story is actually infinite, everything has a beginning, everything is going to have an ending, and everything has surrounding facts around it. Everything happened in time, in a body, in a place. And by naming those factors, it allows the harm to be the size it actually was instead of the size that your isolation can actually make it. So here's a practical way to do this. When you're ready, and only when you are ready, please get a therapist if this is the work you are doing. Write out the harm in 3 columns. Column 1, what happened? This is just the facts. Column 2, what was happening around you at the time? The family system, the community, the historical moment, the conditions. And then in column 3, who was I at that time? What age were you? What developmental stage were you in? What resources did you have? What was your nervous system capacity at the time? The columns hold the harm in a frame, keeps it in a boundary, and the frame is what allows the body to put the experience down. Without context, the body has to keep retelling the story to itself, hoping for clarity. With context, the body can now rest. The story has a place. The story is no longer waiting for someone to listen. It has been heard by you in the proper proportion. I want us to take a break here. And when we come back, we are going to dig a little bit deeper into this episode. And I want us to take a step and a journey into looking at the disruption, because remember, the disruption is important and we need to put things in the proper context. We will be back in just a second. Welcome back, everyone, to the episode. And we are going to get into talking about the disruption. And so remember, I talked about the fact that disruption is important, but understanding that the disruption is not trauma. This is the 3rd chapter that we will be working with today in this episode. Here is what I want to make an important distinction. Disruption is not the same as trauma. And I'm going to keep coming back to this because it's really important. Disruption is the experience of having the ground shift underneath you. Trauma is when the shift overwhelms your capacity to integrate it. And there's a difference. Many of the disruptions you have lived through were very difficult. Some of them were destabilizing. They were painful. And they may not have crossed the threshold into being a trauma. Some of them you metabolized, some you moved through, some you grieved and you adjusted. The disruption did not become a permanent storage in your body. That is healing. That is normal. That is frankly what your body is designed to do most of the time. Why does this matter? Because in the current moment, with trauma language everywhere, we are at the risk of pathologizing every disruption that we have, every change in our life, every difficulty. And when we do that, we forget that we are also capable. We forget that the body has metabolized disruptions before. This is not new. We forget that our foremothers lived through disruptions that would have broken many of us, and they didn't even call it trauma. It's not because they didn't feel what they were going through, but because they had containers for it that we have, if we're being honest, in some ways we've lost. I want us to recover some of those containers. Some of those containers were spiritual, some were communal, some were ritual, some were practical. Our forefathers and mothers had songs that they sang at funerals. They had food that they cooked when somebody got sick. They had sister circles. They had church mothers and fathers who knew without being told who was struggling this week. They had hands, they had presence, and they had a kind of public grief that most of us do not access anymore. When we lose these containers, with every disruption that we go through, it now starts to feel like trauma because the body has nowhere to put the experience. The reason naming an experience as trauma feels accurate sometimes is not always that the moment was traumatic by clinical definition. Sometimes it's that the event happened in a culture that did not give your body anywhere else to take it. The trauma is partly in the event and partly in the container's absence. That is a hard truth, but it points us towards real intervention and things that can be done. Rebuild the containers, rebuild the rituals, rebuild that slow, communal, somatic technologies that our forebears had. Some disruptions cannot become trauma if they're taught by a strong enough container that that's not what this is. So when you are looking at something hard in your own life, the question is not only, was this traumatic? The question should also be, what containers do I have or not have while it is happening? Because the absence of a container is not necessarily your fault, but it is a part of understanding what's going on, a part of the diagnosis of the problem. And it points towards what is the cure for this particular issue. Sometimes the work is not just processing the event. Sometimes the work is building now the container that should have been there when you went through it. That's grief work, that's community work, that's ritual work. That is what we call here the IOA. So let me name what a container actually is because the word may sound vague. A container is anything that can hold an experience so it does not fall through the floor of you. A community of people who knew the person who died and who keep saying their name is a container. A weekly ritual, Sunday dinner, phone calls, sitting on the porch, going for a walk, that's a container. A piece of artwork that you make about something hard is a container. A therapist who has held your story for years is a container. A journal you have kept across seasons is a container. Containers are the cultural and personal infrastructure that catch what would otherwise just become symptoms. And containers in our culture have been quietly disappearing. We are all metabolizing all of these experiences in isolation. And we're wondering why we feel the way we feel. Our body was not designed for this. The cure for that is intentionality. Build the containers back one at a time with the people that you trust in your actual lives. That is the slow process to healing and the slow process of better processing what we're going through. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about what this practice can look like because we don't want to end the show with getting understanding and not getting a tangible way for us to put into action the things that we have learned today. We will be back in just a second. Welcome back, everyone. And before we go a little bit deeper into the ending of this episode, because we're almost done for this week, I did want to highlight the eye gear that we have. You see me wearing some of it today. I am wearing one of our shirts. This is the Live Life Rooted t-shirt. It's monochromatic. So as you can see, the shirt itself is black. The letters are also black, but you can see them, how they pop out. And the more you wash it, the more the letters start to kind of pop out. Comes in a lot of different colors. We have it in maroon. We have it in a blue. We have a gold. We have a like an army green. And there's a lot of other stuff in the Aya store. So get your Aya gear. It is a way for you to wear what it is that you believe that you're doing. And what we're doing here with this work is we are practicing and putting into action living our life rooted. And so that is really important. And sometimes you need these reminders. That's what this is for. So I want us to get into a practice because I feel like a practice is important. I want to give you 3 steps that I think can be important on this journey to doing better with naming correctly what is happening in your life. Number 1, I want you to be able to hold things honestly. Next, I want you to be able to locate precisely. And then I want you to be able to build containers. And so we're going to walk through all of these. Step 1, hold honestly. This week, I want you to sit with a piece of paper or a piece of your story written down or however you want to do this that you have been carrying. Just one piece of your story, not the whole thing. We're not trying to go through your entire life in one swoop. One piece. Name it accurately. Was this stress? Was this grief? Or was this discomfort or a disruption or trauma? All right. So these are your choices: stress, grief, discomfort, disruption, trauma. These are the 5 choices. I want you to try the words on. Notice which one makes your body breathe. The body is going to breathe around the accurate language. It's going to respond to the accurate description of what you went through. The body braces when you are using inaccurate language. So this matters. The body is your tuning system. Trust it. If you find that the experience doesn't quite fit any single word, that is also information for you to use. Many experiences are layered. Something can be both grief and trauma. Some things can be both disruption and stress. The point is not to put your life into a perfect box or to narrow it down to one thing. The point is precision. Bring more precision to your life and make sure you start with accurately naming things. Move 1 degree closer to this accuracy. That will be enough. Step 2, locate precisely. Take the experience, put it into 3 columns the way I described earlier. What happened, what was around you, who you were at the time. Write it out. You don't have to share this with anyone. You don't have to make it eloquent. It doesn't have to be pretty. Just give the experience a frame. The frame is what allows the body to rest. The body cannot rest inside an infinite story. It's going to always be on guard. The body can rest when your story has boundaries. So here's a piece of wisdom that I will give you. The columns might surface compassion that you did not have before when it came to this experience. When you see who you were at that time, your age, your resources, your capacity, you might find that the version of you who lived through those things was much younger, much less resourced, and much more alone than your current self. And you got to give yourself credit for the fact that you made it through it. Some of the harshness that we carry towards our past selves dissolves the moment that we see it in the correct context. The disillusion is healing. And then step 3, build the containers. Look at the disruption in your life that you did not have the adequate containers for at the time. Maybe it was a death you grieve without community. Maybe it was a loss you metabolized in isolation. Maybe it was a transition you went through without having ritual. Now you can build the container retroactively. You can have the dinner, you can have the ritual, you can write the letter, you can plant the tree, you can name the thing in the circle of two trusted friends. The containers do not have to be elaborate, they have to be intentional. The body will now respond to the ritual, even a ritual that happens years, months after the fact. And then looking forward, you've built containers for the disruptions going forward that you know are going to eventually come. The transitions that you can see on the horizon that you know are coming now have containers. The losses that you know that will eventually happen have containers. You can be a person who lives with rituals instead of the person you were in the past that lived without them. That choice is now available to you. It is part of how you keep this season from becoming next season's trauma. So, the Aya pause that I want to give you for this episode and this practice holds all of this together. The pause is what lets you check in on your body before you take on a new label, before you accept somebody else's framing for your experience, before you assign yourself a diagnosis, which you shouldn't be doing anyway, that you read on the internet, right? Take 3 breaths, feet on the floor. What does your body actually say is true about this? That's the question you ask yourself. Once you get the answer, then you act. The pause is the protection against borrowing other people's stories or other people's versions of how you should feel about what you experience. The pause is what keeps you in your own. And one quick more practice that I want to give you, one quick thing. When you have lived through something hard, there can be a temptation to either tell everyone or to tell no one. Both of these responses to me are extreme and they show an absence of containers. So the work is to find the right people. It may be one person, it may be 3 or 4, it could possibly be more over the course of time who can hold your story with the gravity it deserves. This was one of the things I was talking about last week. Everyone doesn't have the capacity to hold your story. It's not that they're a bad person, they just don't have it. And you can't share things with people that can't give it and hold it with the gravity that it deserves. Can't be 500, but it can't be 0 either. 3 or 4, 1 or 2, whatever that looks like for you, build that small council of trust slowly. We talked about testing them with small truths. This is where you do it. Let them earn the larger ones. By the time you get to later stages of life, you now have a small council that you've built over time that will be one of the greatest accomplishments of your life because this is a container that you can always go back to. Most of us think of accomplishments as the things that we've done on our resume, degrees, positions we've held, all the things that we often go to that are big and flashy. Those are accomplishments. But the truer accomplishments is a small circle of people that hold what you carry. Build that on purpose. Tend to it. It is the container that will hold the rest of your story. So remember, hold honestly, locate precisely, build containers. Do these 3 practices slowly, and I guarantee you it will get you to where you're trying to get to. So I want to go ahead and move into our closing. And I want to shout out, as I always do every episode, the listeners at WDJY Radio in the city of Atlanta, Georgia. Thank you for continuing to be here with me on this journey as we are healing loudly and living softly. And I want to say to anyone who has listened to this episode, who has been carrying a story that you felt was too big, you are not your worst chapter. You are not defined by that. You are not the harm that was done to you. You're not the diagnosis. You're not the trauma response. You are a whole, complete person. And the whole person includes the hard things and also the things that were not as challenging. Holding your story in its totality with dignity does not mean you deny any of the pieces of the story. It means refusing to let one piece of it eat at the whole of your entire biography. I want you to hear me. You are allowed to be more than what happened to you. You should be more than what happened to you. You were always more than that. Remember what we talked about here in this episode. Remember, trauma is a response, it's not an event. Precision matters. The body needs accurate language to do the work. Remember, there's 5 different ways we can look at what we go through. Is it stress? Is it grief? Is it discomfort? Is it disruption? Is it trauma? They're all different. They all have their own dignity. We need to call it out precisely. And then we want to make sure that we are naming harm honestly without collapsing our entire identity into it. And lastly, context is your medicine. What happened, what was around you, who you were, those 3 columns, the framing, that is important. And then to reiterate, because I feel like I keep saying this, remember that disruption is not trauma. We have a lot of disruptions in our life. Disruptions become trauma because we've lost the containers that we need to properly hold those things. So make sure that you rebuild those containers retroactively if you must, and build them going forward and strengthen them so that you will have them as you need it. Remember, the Substack Companion is out. It is live. There will be a guided 3-column reflection for the paid subscribers for them to walk through to help them better contextualize what they've gone through. So again, if you are not a Substack subscriber, what are you waiting on? Remember, we want you to subscribe. We want you to review. We want you to share. This is how we keep the work out there. Next week, when we get into episode 34, we are going to talk about something that's important. We're going to talk about love. We're going to talk about boundaries, and we're going to talk about the relationships that help us heal. Because again, we have language for our own stories. And the next question is, who gets to be in the room with us while we live it? So we are going to get in that, and I cannot wait. So as always, until we come back together, remember, we are healing loudly and we're living softly. Get in community, take these things, practice them throughout the week, get on the Substack, make sure that you are subscribing so you have a way to have resources and tools available to you in between our time together. And I promise you will not be sorry for it. So I will see you next week. Have a great one. And remember, live your life rooted.